So in a little series on the CAPM, I talked about diversification. I introduced the capital asset pricing model, and now I need to tell you, why do we actually need it? Why is it used so much in finance? And let's remember what the CAPM says. The CAPM says that the return of any asset, so it could be gold, it could be Tesla stocks, it could be housing, is given by the covariance of the return of this asset with the return on the market, divided by the variance of the return on the market times the return of the market, the average return of the market. So in other words, what does it mean? It says that we get returns for any asset by calculating the covariance of this asset with the market and then using the parameters of the market. So in other words, the formula gets the mean return by looking at the covariance of an asset with the market. And it turns out that it is way easier to estimate variances and covariances than to estimate means. Because, in the end, we need to get to the data and try to understand what are those parameters. And if we're interested in the average return of an asset, we could look at its time series. So what I've done here is I've plotted returns from a stock. Maybe let's say this is Tesla, okay? And here's a fact about stocks. So usually if you look at stocks in the S&P 500, the average returns are in the ballpark of maybe 5%. Yeah, Tesla may be higher, others are lower. And the average variance of returns, I'm talking about yearly figures here, is at about, let's say very roughly 20%. So what does that mean? So we have a lot of movement in this stock and the return of the stock over time. But most of this movement represents variance. So because the variance is 20%. So most of this movement here represents variance, and very little of this movement actually represents returns, right? So if we have a time series of data, then the variance is very dominant and the returns are hard to estimate. In other words, I need a much longer time series to estimate returns than I need a time series to estimate variances, right? Because variances are just more prevalent. They are larger in number, right? And this is the fundamental reason that the CAPM is so successful and important. Because if you look at it, what you need as an input into the CAPM is the covariance, which is something like a variance of the asset with the market. And sure, you need the average return of the market, but it's way easier to estimate the average return of the market because, large stock markets like the S&P 500 have been around for over 100 years than for an individual stock. Stocks like Google, they only exist for 20 years now. So this is the strength of the CAPM. The CAPM is a theoretical model, but it's often used in practice because it relates covariances to returns. And it's easier to estimate covariances than returns. And that's why it's actually so successful and very often used in financial practice.